I'm here today with Alan Hirsch, the author of numerous books, including The Forgotten Ways and 5Q. Alan, how many books have you actually written so far?
I think about 11.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that I haven't really counted, to be honest, but yes, no, I think it's 11.
Right. So out of the books that you've written, is there one concept that is standing out above others as being of incredible value to the body of Christ, the broader church here at the moment?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of things that come through. I think all of them is what I call the Jesus factor. One is, the Jesus effect, that, the role that Jesus plays in determining our identity and our functions in the world. But the other one, I think, would be the idea of the Ephesians 4 typology of ministry, the APEST, or fivefold gifting. It comes up in pretty much of those 11 books. It comes up every time.
Yeah,
I think very important concept.
Yeah, the first of your books that I read was The Shaping of Things to Come.
Yeah,
and I recall it was certainly mentioned back then as well.
Yes.
That was probably what, 18 years ago or some.
Yes, it was 2003.
2003. 18 years
ago. You've got a good
ago.
memory. That's
there
perfect.
we go.
18 years.
So tell us about how you really came to catch on to this whole concept of APEST, and explain what APEST is, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So Tim, I came to the Lord as a convert. I came out of a Jewish kind of family and heritage. And I mean, I had a real profound experience of conversion. It's a complete, Holy Spirit thing. And it's just like, like for a lot of converts, I didn't know that you not meant to take Ephesians 4 that seriously. And so I just did. And I always felt I've always loved Ephesians because I love the flow, the kind of the big grand idea of Jesus and the big grand idea of the church in it. And it just, it seemed to me very important, in a part of that book, an important book on the doctrine of the church, but right in the core of it is about the functions of ecclesia and ministry. And I've always thought it was important. And, we implemented quite early on in our own local, in South Melbourne, when we were doing, and it was quite radical then. But I think it really came home to me when I was doing research for Forgotten Ways, which was really a book that was trying to identify what factors have got to come together to create transformational catalytic movements that change the world. And I was looking at early church in China and anything in between. And I was looking for that swoosh, the exponential growth curve. Yes. And there were a number of factors, but there was one clear one that was undeniable in all the movements that I studied. The phenomenon of APEST was always present. And what actually happened over time, it seems to me that, over time, as you look at a life cycle, it begins to be excluded along the way, and that usually leads to decline. So it seemed to me to be a very, very important factor and one of the essential, what I call MDNA of movements. So I think that's really where it was consolidated for me. And then, we can go on about others.
So explain what APEST stands for, Alan.
Okay, so APEST is really the acronym of the fivefold ministry that Paul talks about in Ephesians 4. And it means apostle, P, prophet, evangelist, shepherd. I use the S because actually it's a better translation of the word poimen in the scriptures, but you can use pastor and then teacher. And we, once we use that language, we kind of know what we're dealing with there. So it's really seeing ministry as comprised in 5 forms, not simply in the twofold form that we tend to kind of operate out of.
No, that's great. So obviously, APEST is mentioned in Ephesians 4:11. Would you mind giving us some context around the rest of the chapter, say from verse 1 on, and just explain some of the context for us here?
Yeah, I might not. I might use a whiteboard here, maybe not. But let's see. So, I won't read it out because I assume that actually the viewers maybe can just open up their scriptures themselves. But what they'll find there in Ephesians 4. 1 to 16, and just to say something about Ephesians 4. Ephesians as a general, it's a general letter. It's not Paul writes corrective letters. It's not that. It's kind of like his general best thinking on the church. Paul, tell us what you think the church is on about. And you really say Ephesians, dude. I write about the church elsewhere, but I'm correcting it. Here I'm not. And so it's really got that important kind of, it's got gravitas. It's got a certain weight about it. And then he's writing to ordinary people. It's not to a group of leaders, and then not to a group of seminarians, not to, it's just ordinary people. In fact, there were slaves, disempowered people, and women. They're equal recipients of what has been said here, which is pretty radical and wonderful. I love the New Testament for that. And then he goes on about in verses 1 to 6. He talks about the striving for the unity of the Spirit, the bond of peace, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of us all, is over all and through all and in all. And this is what we call the unity factors. Now, you and I are into movements big time, right? If you want a movement, especially in the Western world where we're individualists, you have to have things that hold you together stronger than your diversity factors, because you'll never hold as a movement unless you've got strong unity.
Yes.
And so he says strive for it. And then, so that's the basis of what comes in APES. And then in verses 7 and 11, he talks about the ascension, and he says to each one of us grace has been given, verse 7. In verse 11, he says, APES, apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, are given in the ascension. And Tim, this is important because the ascension is really, really significant. It's the commissioning of the church, right?
Yes.
And so in the very foundation of the church, as Jesus ascends to the Father, as the kind of return, the hero's journey, as he goes back to the Father, he bequeaths the ministry of APES to the church. And I would argue that actually, and this is important actually, it's actually Jesus' own identities and purposes, which he confers upon the people of God in the ascension. And just to give weight to the ascension again, it's a commissioning act. Like the other ascension text we often use is Great Commission. And, well, that's important, right? As he returns, he kind of commissions the church into the disciple-making mandate, right? We're not going to take that out. You're not allowed to. You don't get to cherry pick this baby. You're not allowed to. It comes all in one package, APES as a whole. You don't cherry pick teachers and pastors out. And that's it's the middle section. So then you've got, so that's like 7 to 11. And then in 12 onwards, it talks about the impact of APES. And it's all one sentence, by the way, a lot of it. The equipping.
Yes.
Yes, equipping is a good translation, but it's not the only one. That word could also mean healing, restoring, making complete.
Yeah.
It's an interesting word. And
Mm.
and then it goes on to talk about, the unity, you achieve the unity in the faith and the knowledge and the Son of God, and become mature. Mature is, that's a teleos, everything God intends for us. And then, he attaches it, no kidding, to the fullness of Christ. Same sentence. APES leads to the fullness of Jesus Christ. And you cannot dismiss that. No one is allowed to dismiss that. That's important, right? And then it goes on that you become the body, each part connected to other than, to the head that is Christ. Powerful piece of scripture, right? Attached to the ascension and the commissioning of the church. And so that's kind of the broad context. There's a lot that can be said, and I'm the Lord of the long answer. So let me stop at that point.
So, Alan, why do you think that so many churches and movements and denominations over the years have actually decided that they don't need the whole of the 5?
Yeah, I think no one really decided that. You see, it was decided by a slow process of attrition in the early church.
Yeah.
And it starts in the letter of Clement, for instance. Now, Clement, what they were doing there was dealing with the church going through problems of heresy. And a lot of the heresy was coming, all over the place, but appeared to be like local bands of prophets and apostles that were, messing around with people. Or what it's done. And then what he did is he began to expel the APE out of the equation in order to defend the church. But it kind of got into that defensive circle, but then that became normative. And what he opted for was what we call the hierarchical model, the bishop, priest, and deacon model, that then becomes the normative model, the hierarchical kind of thing. And slowly but surely, that just goes into our consciousness. So interesting thing on this, Tim, right? And again, I get very excited about this, so forgive me if, call me to account, but it's interesting that the word, like words matter, right? For us, we're theologos, God words, matter for us. They define things. They've got revelatory value, right? So the interesting thing, the word shepherd, pastor, right? No kidding, dude. I love playing this, and people say, how many times does it occur in the New Testament for the ministry of believers as a noun, the noun naming word? How many times, right? Once.
Okay.
Once. There's some other adjectives. There's an adverb and all that stuff. But once is a noun, right? As a title.
Yes, okay.
And it only appears in this text.
Yes.
No kidding, once. With teachers about 14 times. And most times the Bible uses the word teachers about false teachers. It's not cool. And they're divisive characters, and they really come in for a caning. The word apostle comes up 82 times. You ask most people in most churches, not yours, because your tradition affirms it, but most denominational churches, and they say, "What's an apostle?" They go, "They're in the Bible." And think, yeah, they are, but they're also outside. Actually, the word is a Greek word, apostello, and it was actually a function in society. It's like someone who was sent on behalf of a king or a merchant to do something on their behalf. And so it's used in the scriptures, adapted and all that. Then you say, and then they say, oh, there's 12 of them. Yeah, there were 12, but there were more than 12 actually. And one of them was a woman. Suck that up. Work it out, and then, and then there's nothing else to say.
Yes. And
then the word prophet, no kidding, this is fascinating. Ask most people what they think a prophet is. No, they don't exist in the New Testament anymore. They no more in the church. And said, it comes up 144 times in the New Testament. 144 times. And most people haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
The word evangelist comes up 3 times. And it always looks like Billy Graham. Funny that.
Yeah.
And they're thinking, our mentality is that if we don't know what those words mean, we can never understand the scriptures.
So will you unpack those words for us, those 5 words?
Yeah, let's do it. Apostello, apostle, is the one who is sent. So it's the idea of sentness. And let's look at Paul. I mean, everyone knows, you read the book of Acts, Paul would be a good example, best example of, other than Jesus, who's the primary sent one. Sent by the Father, eternally sent, always was, an apostle, founder of our faith, apostle and high priest, and all that stuff. So Jesus is the one. But let's look at Paul. And you look at Paul, like a ninja, man, unstoppable force, right? So the sent one, what does he do? He goes, right? So, and he does it like this is interesting for our conversation about church planting, Tim. And I think it's worth saying over here. What he doesn't plant churches, actually. He plants the gospel.
Yes.
And Jesus builds the church in that different thing. So you see the church contextualizes differently. And it's expected to be passed on like the gospel, right? So you see church growth and multiplication begins from gospel planting. And it takes you prior to the idea of church, because we always think we know what church looks like, right? It always looks like steeple, pews. And actually the New Testament knows nothing of that. Nada. So he plants the gospel, very important. And then he does this like in increasing, circles. He goes from home based outwards to a frontier, back, outwards to a further frontier, back, outwards. And he does this in 4 journeys going backwards and forwards. And 2 things come out of this. Well, more things. The main thing is that every time he goes to a frontier, he's kind of innovating on the edges. The pioneering thing, you have to, if you're a pioneer, you've got to hunt for your food and cook it. And that requires some adaptability, right? You're translating the gospel onto new ground. So there's this adaptive capacity built into it. So it's like the R&D department of the church. And the other thing that happens in these kind of journeys, he knits together the framework of organization, which is called a network, which you know well of, like Exponential is doing the same thing. You're networking. You're not creating a hierarchical organization. You're organizing through relationships. And that's critically important because movements are basically networked organizations. And I won't spend as much time on the other ones. And I think the apostolic is important for our purposes here. And then he writes letters back, maintaining the DNA, the integrity of the churches, not like huge tomes, like I write too much stuff, just letters, but they correct basic ideas that if you get them wrong, everything else goes wrong. So they're DNA concepts, seminal meta ideas or meta concepts, we call them. They control other things, and that really is creates the movement form, the swoosh. It's not that form of church, but that form. You and I salute you for your service.
You look like something out of Star Trek there, Alan.
Yes, I like that too.
Yeah.
So it's more like the disco, dancing thing. So that's my move. That's my salute. It's because movement thinking, right? So Paul, if you take the apostle out, the sent one out, what actually happens, and this has happened to us, is you remove the apostolic person, the apostolic form of the church, which is the movement form, is destroyed along the line. Who's going to remind you to be sent? Well, the apostolic one.
Yes.
Take apostle out, you don't know what sentness means anymore, and no one's going to remind you, and you're going to be nice, and you're going to stuck with a nice static form of church. And so for our purposes, actually, the apostolic is critically important for the missional purposes of the church in our time. And the recovery of this is very, very important. The word prophet, sorry about the long, I said I'm the Lord.
It's fun, it's great.
Prophet is really the one who keeps you connected with God-obsessed person, guardian of the covenant relationship God has with his people. God enters into a certain style of relationship. It's got obligations to live consistently and also to live it out. But if you really crack it down, the hearer of the word, the seer, the foresight, insight into the nature of things, speaks on behalf of God, the mouth, the heart feels what God feels. It's kind of struggle because it's hard and painful. It's God's pain. But really at the core, I think there's two dynamics of the prophetic: the vertical, upreach, worship, mission, kind of a mystical kind of awareness, like the God orientation stuff, right? Prayer. The other side is what we call the horizontal, which is the justice issues or living consistently with who God is, right? You shall be holy because the Lord your God is holy. And there's an expectation that it's got to be lived out in horizontal relationships as well. And often in the West, what we find is that we have either up or sideways. Very seldom do we have them both ways, and you're meant to have both. Really important in the Bible. In fact, the ones who most critique worship services that don't do justice is the prophets themselves. So there's expectation to live consistently with who God is. Evangelist is the recruiter to the cause, the singer of the song, the inbuilt marketing department, the one who kind of communicates the message and invites people into the story of Jesus as it unfolds. Very important for church growth. You'll never grow without the evangelist, right? The good news person. Mm-hmm. It's a yes. Everyone loves a good evangelist is a person you want to hang around with. The word shepherd is the one who creates community and defends it, brings about flourishing human relationships, healing, wholeness, forgiveness, discipleship, nurture into the faith and all that. Very important for community and the bonding factor for movements. Teacher is the one who brings wisdom and understanding, helps us understand and integrate ideas, assimilate truth into life. Not just intellectually, although that is that, but also in terms of instructional way, learning the way of Jesus and wisdom. Now, which ones don't you want?
Yeah.
And why? And who gave you permission to cherry pick anyway? No one gets to cherry pick that. Which ones are you going to pick out? The missional one? Well, you don't have a permission to do that. So I say, it's interesting, that once you understand the functions, it makes complete sense because all factors of ministry are contained in there. There is nothing missing. Think about it: apostolic, missionary, extension, impact, prophetic, kind of attention to God and the kind of the obligation to integrate life and faith and all that. Evangelist, boy, no one comes to faith without, and there's no yes going on at all. The shepherd, but you can take them up. Teacher will be dumb and stupid. Yeah. So you need all five. And this is where we're finding at the moment, Brian, it's so exciting to me, is that the churches are beginning to change. And we're seeing actually churches now using this language that historically have not. In fact, we had a Presbyterian denomination in the States, took it so seriously that they changed their constitution. Very Presbyterian thing to do.
Wow.
They changed their constitution to affirm fivefold functionality, and now do their training and everything, using that. Now that's phenomenal, and that's just one of the things that's happening.
Yeah.
So this is very exciting. It's a very exciting conversation at the moment.
No, that's good. I guess one of the ways I look at the fivefold ministry is that it's God's natural order. It's what He wants to happen, and I think it's very ironic that in the corporate world, for example, in a secular sense,
Never going to argue this.
Successful corporations generally have those five roles.
Yeah.
And yet we as the church in many cases are just picking up on it now.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. In fact, in 5Q, the book, 5Q, I spent 2 chapters. I don't know if you read it or not, but I think you'd like it because you've got that business edge.
I will read it.
There's 2 chapters on tracking how these are latent in all creation.
Yeah.
And, in marketplace, but also, it's archetypes. It's kind of like, these are patterns in society and in personality, and they recur right throughout. It's fascinating. And one of the things I've been involved in developing is a thing called, I've got the APES test, which is a kind of a vocational profile. I've also been working with some brilliant business leaders to create a thing called Impact. I'll give you a shot at it. I'll send you a link.
Yeah, great.
It's a marketplace tool using APES dynamics, but it's completely, marketplace. It's brilliant. And they've done a crackpot job, and they spent $500,000 doing it, which, again, is, I've never been able to do.
No,
but it's absolutely phenomenal tool.
Yeah, no, that I'd be very, very interested in seeing that and talking more about that particular one too. So looking at the typical church over recent decades, we've often seen the church as being centering around the shepherd and also the teacher. Do you think that's because those are the 2 areas that create safety in a church, where you've got the apostles are wanting to bring about change and innovation. You've got the prophets who are wanting to bring correction in many cases. You've got the evangelists who are wanting to bring in new people, and they might offend some people as well. Whereas the pastors are there to really bring healing and to help people with a sense of belonging. And the teachers are there often to bring the wisdom that's already there. And change can actually be a disruptive factor.
Yes.
And so in a way, would you say that the pastors and the teachers' roles have to be redefined so that the pastors are also there to help people manage change and walk through change? Would that be is that a fair comment?
Let me deal with the first half and then come to that second, because I think that's the big question. The interesting thing is, and I think you spotted exactly the point, is that in movements of change the world, and this is, like I said, when we said right in the beginning, it's APES is always a factor. Now, if you take like standard thinking of organizational growth and decline, so you've got that the bell curve. You have your up curve, which is all all the dynamics that start movement, and of course you get the down curve, which is the death of movement, and becomes an institution, a monument. There studies in leadership studies have tracked different types of leaders or influences at different stages of an organization, from the different language. Lawrence Miller, Yitzhak Adizes, Good to Great, who's that guy's name again? Tim Collins. You all use this typology really well, brilliantly actually, and rightly. And what if you apply this with APES, what you'll find is that on the uptake, there's always the five operative. And I break it down into 2 forms. What I call generative form, apostolic, prophetic, evangelistic, generate new form, as you suggested, because for different reasons. One is for mission, one is for faithfulness and loyalty, and kind of a sense of you can always do it better, holiness. Evangelist, because about relevance of the church, and it has to constantly change. But the other 2, what I call operative forms of leadership or ministry, they take what is given and make it better.
Yes, that's good.
And it's like your HR department, right? It makes the organization a whole lot better.
Yeah.
You need all 5. And what happens on the other side of the equation is that in the name of stability and not wanting to change, because all organizations will get you in the end, they resist it after a while, become institution, they eject the APE. So the apes are exiled. And it's a formula for decline. Every denomination in decline in the world has ejected the APEs out of the equation. And what we call in the thing sigmoid growth, that is that, you get the capacity to S-curve it. Yep. You have to add APE into the equation again. And this is again what we're experiencing now, is that those who are taking it fivefold seriously are beginning to have generative capacities again in the life of the church. And that's exciting again too. The second question is do shepherds and teachers need to adjust their thinking? Yes, but I think one of the things that we need to do for particularly the pastor, remember it's mentioned only once, it overreaches itself. It's become the catch-all phrase for every form of leadership in the world, right? I mean, pastor this, pastor that, It's got to come down to biblical proportion. It way overreaches itself. And this is a problem for people who take on pastoral ministry, because they're not all designed for that. And so they need to think, I think, more narrowly about what the function is and focus on the community stuff. Teachers are similarly, they overreach. And then they've got to make space for the others in the equation. And the diversity of other voices and having the dynamics in a local church enables the apostolic voice to be dialoguing with the others and all of them dialoguing with each other. And that's the fivefold dynamic you want, because you will produce answers and solutions out of that mind, the corporate mind, much better than you could ever do out of a twofold understanding. Yeah. And, because you've got the generative added in. So there has to be a shift in the way we think about local church ministry, but also in terms of our own callings and impact on what we're meant to do.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Alan, we'll finish up in a second. But what books and resources would you recommend for people who want to explore the whole APEST concept further?
So Tim, I've four of the books I've written. Let's call it two, because they're actually workbooks, some of them. But two of them that I've written, at least from my angle, if people want to explore it, are my most recent one. One of my more recent books is 5Q. And honestly, bro, the other one behind it, we'll come back to this one, but is this book, The Permanent Revolution, which is quite a thick book. And this focuses primarily on the apostolic in light of the fivefold. But it really is trying to develop apostolic awareness, because it's the one we least understand and the one we most need right now. It's not more important than anything else. But right now we need movemental intelligence, and the apostolic is the one. So there's very substantial work there. This one over here, I set out to write this book, and it was, I was then applying, I've always seen it as vocation and calling, how God has shaped me to contribute. I began to use the fivefold thinking in terms of organizational functionality and dysfunctionality. Assessing in that way, and I thought I've done an assessment that can be done for an organization that is called 5Q Diagnostic, and I was just going to write a little kind of one chapter thing to give away on the internet, to explain what we were doing then. And dude, I'm telling you, when I started writing this, it began to blow my. I'd written already substantial work on this. My mind, seriously, I had to rewrite it 4 or 5 times. And it took me probably a good 2 years longer than it should have. Well, I just had to because it just began exploding out. And I don't know how else to say to you, that just, for me, this was an exhilarating experience actually in writing this book. And think about it. There are 2 workbooks that go with that. So there's ways in which tools and resources and all that stuff. And this is very practical. So half of it is the theoretical component, and half of it is really how you apply it in the local church. Tools, etc., etc. Books that are not from myself, but Forgotten Ways, by the way, is an expression of apostolic intelligence. But J.L. Woodward and Dan White Jr., good friends of mine, who started a movement called V3, brilliant movement. About no more than 10 years old, and it's beginning to really flourish in the States. I've written a really good book called Missional Culture. The name just has gone right in my head right now. Creating a Missional Culture.
Okay.
So Dan White and J.R. Woodward, very good book. And then Neil Cole has written a really good book called The Primal Fire, very cold, practical, down to earth kind of book. And there are, of course, books that come out of, often say the kind of apostolic Reformation folk and all that. There's some useful ones there, but they, in my opinion, tend to kind of confuse APEST with authority, spirit, and they tend to go CEO domination type of stuff, and it's been very problematic actually. A lot of people stay away from the conversation because they fear that kind of stuff, and I just think it's because they don't understand the terminology.
Yeah, no, that's
and
great.
the word, what the Bible means by it. So yes, that's what. Yeah, you can go to a website, by the way, all the stuff together. We've got tons of tools and resources available. 5Q Central.
5QCentral.com.
5Q as in 5Q. Central.com.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Alan, just if I can just sum up very, very succinctly, some of what you've been saying, you're saying that we need to have APEST in our churches and our movements, our denominations, and people who are apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, or teachers need each other.
Yes.
Because we're not, without each other, we're not whole. And for the churches to be healthy, we've got to get back to having APEST.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely right. And I need you to be me. And that's the body of Christ, right? Is that we don't all have the answers ourselves, and we need each other to actually be, we need the counterbalancing dynamic of the different elements of ministry to really get it right. And here's the exciting thing. We'll stop at this point, right? What I love about the ascension thinking is that what I can say this is that Jesus has given us already in the ascension, Jesus has given us everything we need to get the job done. Every church has got the latent capacity and intelligence in it to do exactly what Jesus intended. And that's why the New Testament church grew. That's why Chinese underground church, with all the stuff that we've got, get it right, because they get the fivefold. The fivefold is already there, given to the church in the ascension. Activate it and see where it takes you.
That's great. Alan, thank you so much for your time today, and really appreciated hearing your insights and your wisdom. So thank you.
Thank you, brother, and Lord bless you in your ministry.